Hi, I'm Jessica Ritz. I'm a freelance lifestyle writer based in LA. I cover a variety of topics, including restaurants, food, design, and I contribute to outlets such as Metropolis, Architectural Digest Pro, C Magazine, and others.
Oh, hi, I'm Alexis Readinger. I'd like to point out that Jessica is the writer that writes about the intersection of food design and architecture for years. So I just need to point that out. I founded and run a design firm called Preen Inc. We've been in the heart of the food world for 20 years and doing architecture and hospitality design.
Okay. Jump in. I'm Greg Bleier, founding partner of Studio Unlimited, which is a hospitality design practice here in Los Angeles. It's about 10 years old, and our focus primarily is on restaurant design. David.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm David Kuo, chef and owner of Little Fatty and a Compost Bar. Glad to be part of this panel and looking forward to sharing some ideas.
Am I last? Okay, I'll go last. I'm Hunter Hall. I do like 19 things. I have a hospitality consulting firm called Archetype. And then I also work in the civic realm with city governments. And currently I'm doing a lot of alfresco work in the city of Santa Monica, helping restaurants and other businesses come out into the street and kind of reimagine how they are interacting with the world.
Hey, thanks for all those actions. So this was about the future of restaurants, and we know that restaurants are in trouble. Some are still actively serving clientele, and they're mostly in survival mode, frankly. And I've heard the word pivot more times since March than I have in my entire life up until then. I think
that word is banned. We're not using the word pivot anymore.
Okay. We've heard the statistics about jobs lost, all the vulnerabilities that have been exposed, from operating costs to just the inequity that riddles the service industry. But despite all this grim news, people can and they will eat out again, and they already are in various iterations and forms. And other industries have received help from federal government and other agencies, but restaurants have been kind of left on their own. So with that, I'd love to hear from Hunter about if you can speak to your experience working with Santa Monica municipalities, and what does a supportive regulatory environment look like moving forward for the restaurant industry?
Good question. Sure. Supportive regulatory environment. None. No, a regulatory environment would be really just kind of rapidly rethinking the way that government interacts with all businesses, but especially the hospitality business. Santa Monica has done a great job with that, actually, and that's partially due to the fact that it's a smaller city. It's about 100,000 residents, so it's a little bit more nimble for cities like Santa Monica, Culver City, West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and others to do more rapid iterative processes than larger cities, because there's so much more involved and it's sometimes a little bit slower. I think that what's key is for all the departments to kind of cut through all the red tape as much as possible. We've had a lot of really interesting calls with cities about how to do that and how to kind of get all the departments who don't always see eye to eye to come to the table and just kind of slice through all the unnecessary burdensome processes that have sort of built up over the years. It needs to happen, and it has been happening at the state level a little bit. We've seen that with like the ABC. I work with the California Restaurant Association as well, and we've been talking with the ABC and other agencies about how to do a lot of that, and we were instrumental in helping the ABC draft its expansion of footprint permit, for example, which allowed restaurants to sell alcohol outside, and that was kind of one of the key components of this whole alfresco dining movement, right? So we hope that stays permanently, and we believe now that the cities are getting the picture that this isn't going to change anytime soon, and so they're going to have to think long term.
And to Alexis and Greg from the design side, what do you think what do you think the county and municipalities can do to support an environment and some new regulatory measures that help support design and other sort of physical parts of the restaurant experience that we're going to need in the future?
Can I take it for a minute, Greg?
Go for it.
My beloved colleague. Yeah, I wanted to jump in because, you know, Hunter and I have been chatting with the mayor's office. And Taylor, do you mind taking the call? Yeah, sorry. And one of the things that came up on the call today is, you know, I serve on the Chinatown Fed, and we've been really exploring. Look, Hunter did so much with Santa Monica with thickening the vitality belt on Main Street. And we've been in conversation with Culver City the whole time on shutting down Main Street for Piccalilli, our restaurant there. And the thing that really is exciting to me is the opportunity to take a forever look at increasing our vitality in the city of LA. And so we've been, you know, we are an al fresco pro bono dining consultant. I imagine you are too, Greg. What? Slacking. But really, like, how do we reshape the city and allow this spirit of generosity that's embedded in hospitality to come on and impact the way that people experience it? Also as a run-up to the Olympics.
Greg, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just from what I've been seeing, I mean, we haven't had the luxury of having clients that have at least engaged us in terms of putting themselves into the streetscape. My understanding, though, and maybe Hunter or Alexis can kind of piggyback on this. It doesn't seem like there's like a task force, like, you know, dialed into this, where it makes it a little bit easier or more consistent. Let's say for the city of LA, businesses to take over the streets. So I think there's a lot of missteps along the way, or there are people that are unsure of what they're able to do. So I think the city could possibly, you know, take stronger action in terms of giving a little bit more clear direction as to what kind of right of way that, you know, the businesses are able to take. You know, we talked a little bit about this before, but the idea of being able to actually take parkways en masse would be really, really helpful, I think, for, you know, maintaining public right of way in terms of street, you know, access, but also delineating space for restaurants that can be actually designed and maintained, which, you know, isn't the case right now.
Which could link back to the proposed road diets, like the one that made everyone so angry when they did it to Venice, right? Everyone was pissed, but like we have one scheduled for Chinatown for Broadway. I don't know what's happened with it. I don't know if the council office doesn't want to push that because there's a potential for it to be unpopular. But you know, I think it's important to kind of look at given the current situation, look at some of these situations that they had already outlined.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what you said, it's hard, right, Greg? You're right. Most city agencies don't, I don't want to say they don't communicate well, but they don't necessarily agree. And what, say, the mobility division of any city wants to do doesn't gel with what, say, the police department wants to do or what the fire department wants to do. For example, I'll just give you an inside scoop on Santa Monica. And this is true of all cities, I believe. It makes sense to people like you and me and probably everyone on this call just to shut the street down, right? And certainly the restaurants want that by and large. However, a lot of the retailers don't want that. They typically pitch a fit when it comes to that kind of thing because they value parking much more. Also, the police and emergency services don't like that idea at all, because whenever you talk about restricting access to any arterial street, right, anywhere, it's a problem for them. And then you get into this rabbit hole of, well, who has access to their driveway, and what about me, and like all that stuff. So it's hard, right? And I think that the key is to find rapid iteration and rapid kind of agreement on what the best, quickest thing to implement would be. And I think it's different for every city. Speed is the number one factor, I believe.
Yeah, I think a lot of
sorry, go ahead.
what you were saying, Hunter, or actually back to even Jessica's initial comment. I mean, so much of the restaurant industry is in survival mode right now. So a lot of this is kind of like, what are like simple, quick, fast design solutions that can get people working and get people open, and maximizing their ability to make money and make ends meet.
Yeah. So from an operator standpoint, David, what are some things that you've seen happen that have been supported, and other measures that could help businesses?
So from a restaurant standpoint, there is deferment of, they passed some kind of resolution or a law that allows restaurants to defer payment on sales tax. So that kind of helps, but you still have to pay it. It's going to be a bigger bill, in 6 months. So restaurants can take advantage of that. One program that actually was really, really helpful and really, really quick was the parking meter, where a restaurant can request the parking meter to be a 10-minute pickup zone. And so I submitted my application, and like 2 days later, there was a sign on the meter, and the meter was changed to a pickup. I don't know what the program's called, but it basically designates that meter with a sign that says it's for the restaurant to pick up food. I know on entitlements, we're taking advantage. Right now, they lowered the parking, or from my understanding, they lowered, or there are no parking requirements to expand or change the use of a building or of a space into a restaurant space. So we're looking to add square footage for the future, and obviously that takes time, but hopefully in time this thing will pass. I think the other thing is building parklets. I know that's the Department of Transportation, but also on the sidewalk. There's a lot of, it all really depends on where you are and how fortunate you are. If you have a big parking lot, if you have a big sidewalk, those things are all beneficial to a restaurant. But keep in mind, like in my area, there's a lot of homeless people, so it's kind of tricky. And there's also a farmer's market who is really, really particular about having their sidewalks and parking space, because that means they lost, like 4 vendors. Even though I'm here every day and paying rent, they get upset that the one day they're here and they don't even pay rent, that their space is taken. So you got to take it, just like Hunter said, you have to think about all the connecting pieces, whether it be, homeless people to, emergency transportation. But like Culver City, they closed Main Street. El Segundo closed one of their streets. Santa Monica closed some streets. West Hollywood passed a proposal to close the sidewalks permanently. But Culver City has like a lane, I think, right, for emergency vehicles, but not regular vehicles. So I think if we all work together, I think there could be some solutions.
Culver City's got big barricades that can get moved. Yeah. Kind of, they have like an opening in the big barricades. Yeah. But it's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking on what Greg said, though, because I think the technical question is like what design-wise obviously can be done to make it a better space. There's definitely, and this varies by city, but there's definitely a regulatory approach that makes it easier, right? When you have a very just cautious by nature city government, wherever that might be, they have a tendency to kind of approach everything, including outdoor dining, through the lens of what's the best way to reduce the chance of an incident of any kind to 0. And of course, that's not possible, right? It's not possible to make it so safe to dine in the street that there's no chance something bad can happen. It's also impossible to make it or to design it and regulate it in such a way that there's no way a resident's going to complain about having to kind of weave through a particular choke point on the sidewalk or something like that. Obviously, ADA access needs to be maintained. It's very important. But, you know, I think some flexibility with the way that these parklets are designed, that all stems from regulation, right? If you look at the regulations that are put in place in all these cities, they have codes regarding the outdoor dining. And depending on how restrictive they are, that's kind of the framework that gives designers the sandbox to play in to come up with creative ideas, right? If you can't put a roof on a parklet, well, you're kind of limited, right? If you can't use lighting, you're kind of limited. And I think that the more layers you add on to that, it just gets more and more restrictive. And then you're just sitting in, you know, a street, and that's not sexy. So, you know, I think that's kind of what Greg was talking about earlier.
We're having that issue.
And do you all think outdoor dining is here? Because
No, just freezing.
LA culture, I'm freezing.
Yeah, you want to try that again?
Okay. No. Yeah. Hang on. All right. Edit.
Cut.
Cut. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Do you all think that LA outdoor dining has been transformed by this time, and it is something that's hopefully here to stay in some form? Because it's just crazy that it hasn't been part of our restaurant culture as much as it is in other places that have similar climates.
God, I hope so. It's so weird. Every time my family comes to visit in LA, the first thing they say is, it's so weird that you all don't have more outdoor dining. It doesn't make any sense, right? So yes, I hope it stays forever.
I mean, a lot of that I would say is predicated on the actual space available. So a lot of the buildings initially just weren't designed with that in mind. So the ones that have that space adjacent or part of it in terms of a courtyard or, you know, backspace are kind of like the jewels of the LA restaurant scene. So I think, and I think David was talking about this the other day about his new space, looking at maybe stepping in facades. So that might be ways that we can start to see, you know, restaurants in limited spaces starting to take back some exterior space. But yeah, I would absolutely hope so. I mean, if you think about New York and Chicago and other cities that have far worse weather than ours, the outdoor dining scene is much more vibrant.
I don't know what New York's going to do in the winter. I mean, my God.
Yeah, there's definitely a time limit on that. But for David, for a restaurateur, chef like you who doesn't have an outdoor space option, what are some of the other things you've been doing to adapt in this time?
Well, definitely. I mean, luckily our to-go business is doing pretty well. We actually just remodeled to accommodate our to-go business. We added a takeout window. It's a lot different when you go from a regular restaurant to a takeout only restaurant, and especially because we luckily we do the same amount of sales, but in half the amount of time. So you try to sell, like, let's say you sell 800 dishes over 10 hours, but now it's 800 dishes between 5 and 9. And so it does put a lot of pressure on your kitchen. So right now on Labor Day, we recently remodeled to streamline and, ease, and we added computer screens instead of printers. That way it's a lot easier to read how many orange chicken you have. We moved some equipment around, so like the front of the house can help out by like grabbing a salad or grabbing a sauce. So we just think of ways, because we know it's not gonna go away. We actually removed all the seats because we had an open kitchen at Little Fatty, and we actually just came to realization that the to-go business is here to stay for at least a year. So we actually removed all the seats and we added the takeout window and then all that stuff to the cooking line. And we're adding new menu items, but I mean, we do have outdoor space, and we'll probably utilize it. But like I said, for us, it's really tricky because of the farmers market and all that stuff. But in general, we're just keeping to our core business. adding some new menu items and making it a little bit more streamlined for us. But we're also looking to sell stuff outside the four walls. So we're looking to do consumer packaged goods, like we have a line of dumplings coming out in fall that you can buy, or we're going to try to sell them to Sprouts and stuff like that. So you can go to the store and enjoy a little fatty at home. We're looking, we signed a deal with RoboMart, which is like the first ever hailing store. So it's like an Uber, but it comes to you, and it's like CVS, or for us, it's called Fatty Mart, where you can get like our grab and go food, but you go ahead and call it to you. So we're just looking outside the walls for different businesses for more revenue. Yep.
Have to do it.
Yeah. Well, and how are people in this industry making decisions about what makes sense to invest in the short term and the long term, because there are so many unknowns. So without some sort of major governmental support, it seems like a very difficult calculation to make. So I'd be curious to hear about how that's being done and what people are seeing out there.
I think it's really, really scary as an operator, because in the beginning you couldn't even get flour and eggs and stuff like that. There were people hoarding. So some restaurants chose to, be like a marketplace. But so then they invested in, merchandising. They pivoted. They switched from being like a steakhouse to now like a grocery store. But then 2 months later, they say you can reopen. So you spent all this money and spent all that time and lost all that revenue from your core business. And then your customers are confused. Are you a steakhouse, or do you sell eggs, or eggs and steak? And then now we're pivoting to outdoor. So we're going to invest all this money in outdoor. And then maybe like Orange County, we're going to open indoor. But the outdoor is still good, obviously. But you can see from an operator, it's just really scary that there's nothing like, oh, there's a goal. So now I can go for that goal. And, now I know where to put my money. So we just have to be flexible and just be very careful, because everything can change on a dime. So you have to make calculated decisions, and with the information that you have, the limited information you have. So I think it's really scary pivoting.
Yeah, I think that like, it's not all bad for everybody though, right? I used to work with a consulting firm that did a lot of insolvency work, and just like back then from 2009 to 2012, right now we're seeing a lot of people with liquid assets take advantage of that. There's a lot of people who are moving to snatch up buildings if they're available, or take advantage of lease takeover situations to grow their brand that was already doing well. I think that from a statewide level, the new colored tier system, nobody really likes that. It's very confusing, and currently there's no path to getting to 75% for restaurants by the end of the year, which is kind of a deal breaker economically. I think that private property, like David mentioned earlier, is going to be a huge asset that landlords should find a way to leverage. And I think that new construction would be foolish not to consider the effect the pandemic has had on the public's willingness to eat indoors. Again, like we've talked about in the past, even if a vaccine drops tomorrow, people aren't going to rush out and get it. It's not gonna go back to normal, I don't think, ever. Certainly not in the next 5 years, in my opinion.
And I'd like to weigh in on this, actually, Jessica, because the question about capital investment is always so integral to the conversation of design. And to weigh in on what David said earlier too, Tess, our restaurant up on Sunset, Tess took the little cafe and switched it into market right at the beginning, and actually became more profitable than the cafe ever was. And then, they've expanded into the patio there, and they're doing well. With Piccalilli, with us going into Main Street, that's a real issue because of the farmer's market. So we can't have lighting, and we have to move everything out every night. And so we've been trying to find ways that we could extend the magic of the brand into the exterior. And on the interior, interesting thing about the actual design narrative is we opened in January, and the design narrative was to create the restaurant as a future waypoint and in a pop apocalyptic future where two lovers could hope to meet. And then we're like, and we were thinking about it as like Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, where there's these people sitting at this bar and this observation from outside and this lighting and this beacon to the neighborhood. We actually manufactured the first architectural blacklight lighting for this project. And there's a whole conversation of shadow and moth that's attached to it. So when you're at certain tables in there, you'll get a lavender shadow, which is part of the sort of pop shadow of it. But there's magical animals in the space, and we just recently completed a gazelle and a panther that have moved, that are on the patio, to try to bring something of this like playfulness in this brand to the exterior. And I think for them, it makes sense. For other clients we have, it doesn't make sense to invest in exterior patio that's only going to be there for 90 days. I mean, the city has guaranteed exterior patios till the end of the year. And so that's one of our conversations that we're having on a case-by-case basis of like evaluating old school parking requirements. Can we eliminate a couple parking spots? Can that patio be permanent?
Yeah, if there's no ROI, there's no point.
Yeah. So what are some of the restaurant categories, not in terms of food or culinary genres, but more like price points that seem to be the most vulnerable now? And then what do you think, no one has a crystal ball, but what are the experiences the public will want in the future on the other side of this, whatever that means?
Good question. I think I'll start out, and I know David's got a ton of stuff to say on this subject. But mid-level independent restaurants that are full service, your traditional like neighborhood casual spot, not fine dining, but it's not grab and go, it's not quick serve. They're going to be the hardest hit. Like many other trends in the restaurant business, this existed pre-COVID, right? So COVID is really just accelerating and putting an accentuation mark on it, right? Exclamation point rather, because that mid-level tier was getting sort of cannibalized at both ends anyway. I don't think fine dining is going anywhere. I think that people will probably still gravitate towards experiential dining, whether it's cool spaces or special occasions. Those aren't really going anywhere. Interestingly, my fiance is an event planner, does a lot of weddings and high-end corporate events. And, people are still trying to book those events, right? Because people will always get married. People will always want to do bar mitzvahs and things like that. And they're willing to mentally put themselves through the gymnastics of justifying it for their own life and their own, what they view as important. So anyway, back to your question, I think that mid-level is just going to continue to evaporate. And I think interesting, innovative concepts, whether it's things that David's doing or cool spaces like Alexis designs and Greg designs, those will continue to do well as well.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think Hunter's hitting the nail on the head. It's going to be devastating for like the independent restaurant. I think a lot of people in the very beginning were gravitating towards comfort food, so pizza, pasta, sandwiches, hamburgers, fried chicken, that kind of thing. And I even read like an article like the grocery trends that are here to stay because of pandemic. People wanted to cook more at home. They want to cook more complicated things at home. So I think the restaurants on the high end are going to be okay. There's always going to, I think LA Times just did a dinner series with Nightshade and Kato, and it was like $350 for a 3-course dinner, and it sold out. So there's always going to be those kind of, that clientele. There's always going to be a special place for your birthday. But it's that local place that depends on you to eat there once every 2 weeks or once every week. I think that's what we kind of found out, and that's our niche, is like we feed people once a week at $10 to $20. And I think if you're not in that game, then you're going to be suffering. So I think that's the price point. Yeah.
And what are the real estate realities that we're looking at as well? With it doesn't sound like landlords are budging. And even if rent payment deferral is an option, it's not as if suddenly a rush of revenue is going to come in to pay all those months of back rent. So what are some programs or ideas that can make sure restaurants physically can be here in the future?
Oh boy, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it? I'll start out on that, but I'm curious what Greg and Alexis are hearing from the developer kind of design angle. Obviously, there's these commercial eviction moratoriums that are happening all around the state, city by city, but they really fall short, right? Because there's no upward pressure from the business community or from the local community to bail out property owners, right? Property owners have been suspiciously left out of any kind of bailout package on a federal level. And that creates a massive problem because property owners are business people too. A lot of them are mom and pops who just own 1 or 2 buildings. They're not all giant CIM groups that have, you know, $1 billion portfolio, and they have to get paid too, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, we can defer these rent payments for a short period of time, but eventually the bank has to be paid as well. So, you know, there's lots of stuff being talked about behind the scenes. I know that there's been chatter over the last month of a national restaurant rent strike to put upward pressure on the federal government, essentially to bail out property owners in some way or create some kind of program for them, right? The Restaurants Act is the #1 thing that all restaurant lobbyists, including myself and groups like the California Restaurant Association and the Independent Hospitality Coalition are pushing. It's the federal program, obviously. It's not perfect, but it's the single best shot, I think, that the business has of getting the life support it needs. You know, property owners are not always making deals right now. We just did a seminar on that actually on rent in the hospitality business. And I think, you know, the #1 piece of advice I have, and I'd be curious to hear what David and others say, is just make a deal, you know, get to the table with your property owner and come up with something creative quickly. You know, percentage-based rents are becoming a little bit more palatable to some, whereas previously they weren't. But I think for those property owners that aren't rushing to make a deal, they're in for a rude awakening because nobody's rushing to sign a lease right now. David, you want to rush in on that, or?
Yeah, so we're looking to expand. So like every week I look at 2 or 3 different properties. I think if it was like on a scale of, you know, like a dip or whatever, I think we're barely like right here. Real estate always lags like 18 months from reality. Even housing is still going up right now, which is crazy. But there are deals to be made. I think besides corporations, I think every landlord is just like any other person. Some are nice, some are mean, some will listen, some don't care. But you got to realize after looking at real estate, it's not just like, oh, woe is me, I'm the little operator. Like everyone has bills to pay, and their bills are actually even bigger. And they can lose their property just like we could lose our livelihood. So there has to be some medium. And like before luckily our landlord allowed us to expand, you know, 2 times, and they allowed to take over the market that we're going to be opening. So we've always, just like anything in business, we've always cultivated this relationship in case this did happen. And even before it did happen, I saw the things going on in China and Europe. So even like a month or 2 before we got shut down, I said, hey, I'm doing fine right now, but like, I don't know what's going to happen with the world. But if it does happen, do you think we could take the next 6 months rent and add it to the 7 through 12 months and just spread it out over those, or, you know, even the next year? So I already made plans to defer payment, or, you know, before this even happened. That's what I recommend to everybody, is just have an open line of communication with your landlord. And going out and looking at property, yeah, a lot of things are still valued really high because they need to pay off a note from, you know, 2019 or 2018. Everybody, I mean, depending on when they bought, it's, you know, every situation is different. So obviously, like when the housing crisis of 2008 happened, that was the perfect time to buy. So obviously we're looking for good deals. Yeah, we're looking at percentage rent deals, you know, under, you know, I'm not going to sign anything over $4 unless it's like a home run. So, but like I said, I think it hasn't even dipped yet. And like Hunter said, they're in for a rude awakening. And there's going to be less people willing to open a restaurant. And what it definitely is an acceleration of a correction. There was too many restaurants, too many specialized restaurants. People were creating a lot of passion projects, not running businesses, I think. And now it's a rude awakening that this is actually a business.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Too many restaurants. I've been saying that for years. I'm curious, Greg and Alexis, what are you seeing from developers? Like, are they willing to, throw in some cash and sweeten the deal for potential new projects with, heavy hitter restaurant people, or not so much?
I feel like I want Greg to talk because he hasn't talked that much, but I also really want to answer this.
You can
Greg,
go
you go first. You go first, Greg.
You can go. Okay. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I will say, you see a mixed bag, right? I think, as David said, there's this lag, but I think it's starting to accelerate right now. So we're starting to see unfortunate closure after closure after closure, really starting to pick up some pace here, which is, hugely unfortunate, but ultimately there will be people to fill some of that space at some point. So as you were saying, again, like, a lot of people are not necessarily understanding that on the landlord front yet. Some are. We're working with a client in Culver City as well, who, they've been talking to somebody that we've been speaking with, one, potential client who's moving here from another state, and they're looking at percentage deals, and that seems to be kind of moving forward, and that's great. But it's really just case by case basis. So, like, we have clients in other cities that are looking at pretty bullish at this thing, where they're like taking brand new builds, huge properties. I mean, they are kind of like, still in negotiation. Like, we're like, they're pretty, again, bullish. So we already have a contract. We're already designing. They don't really have everything like dotted and signed yet, but they'll get there. But from a Los Angeles standpoint, I think it's people looking at alternatives. So, like, we brought up pivoting. People are looking at different ways to make things work in the future, even if it's something that they can grow into, like a more full service over time. But we're seeing a lot more kind of flexible, so it's not straight up restaurant. You see a little bit of like marketplace sprinkled in. So yeah, and the function, the focus is a little bit more on smaller footprints too. So we're not seeing, like, people aren't like rushing out to get like 6,000 square foot spaces right now. So we're going to see a lot of that stuff, second gen restaurants and whatnot, probably, sitting until something is done where, landlords can, or property owners can drop their square footage, fees.
Cool. And I think we've been in a trend for a while. I mean, I'm what, 20 years in hospitality, and it's in certain business circles, let's say more hotel sector, or conferences or awards or anything that has to do with hotel, all of a sudden there's been more attention on F&B in the last couple of years. And I think that part of that conversation is that as the hospitality sector as a whole, and like hotel has gotten better and better designed, that it's become crucial for certain assets to have a crown jewel that's an F&B concept in it to differentiate the property from the rest of the kind of hotels out there. And I think you're seeing it we've been seeing it in well done apartments too. We have a restaurant, we're doing a new Pine and Preen downtown, which is the last missing piece to that multi-million-dollar asset development. It's very important to like the holistic nature of the whole property for that to be there. And we've been talking with a lot of developers. I think there's going to start to be more interest from the development side on capitalizing F&B concepts because they actually need them for their property to have that extra value. And I think you'll see a shift of money in some ways on that.
Yeah, totally. I think that's 100% correct. Also interesting to note is that the entire use of space, just from a macro level, has shifted and will never go back, right? When you sign a restaurant lease, let's say like in an office building that has workers that are now all working from home, well, the value of that lease just tanked, right? And so the idea that all those workers are going to come back to that office building tomorrow or whenever there's a vaccine or something like that is just naive. Now that everyone has a taste of working from home and so many people love it, I'm one of them, and so many people love it. It's hard to do creative work, we've all realized, remotely. I've heard that from enough people in the creative business that I think that's probably true. Okay, Alexis is shaking her head, maybe not. But anyway, I think that we got to rethink the value of space, right? So if you're a developer, I would have to imagine that you have to sweeten the pot for, these anchor tenant restaurateurs like the Bill Chiats of the world and the other heavy hitters who really bring value to a property. I love Pine and Crane, by the way. I want to know where that is. That's like one of my favorite restaurants.
They should open on the west side too. And so this conversation has been design focused, but there's also been a lot of talk with disruption in hospitality and conversations about social justice and equity. And how does that figure into the future of restaurants? I mean, to me, that's a huge issue. As you probably saw that opinion piece in the New York Times yesterday about looking at labor and cooperative models and debating the no tipping models. And is that something that people are, or is that more sort of specialized? I mean, our conversation has been more from the business side. What are folks' thoughts around that? Especially David, since you're in the trenches of it.
Yeah, I mean, David, if you want to start out on that, I also have a ton to say on that because I was neck deep in that world for a while. What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, so since we moved to takeout only, the front of the house actually agreed to give 25% of their tips to the cooks, and they really responded very happily, obviously. I mean, Danny Meyer couldn't even change our culture about no tipping, so I don't want to be the first one, but it doesn't make sense for a front of the house person to walk home with like $400 and the cook walk home with $150. There should be some equity there, but also there's a lot of laws where I can't touch the tips and they have to agree to it, or it's called a service charge. And I know John and Vinny and their group in Rustic got hit with something, about that. So I'm just a small player right now, but we're definitely looking into that. On the social side, we partnered with the farm. We built a farm in Mid-City, which is going to be growing food for a restaurant, for a grocery store, but also for education, for the school people and donating food. We donate food to Nourish LA. It's every Sunday. They give out, they're up to like 700 people served every Sunday, free food. So, I mean, we're definitely tapped into that world. We're not just talking about like, oh, let's do this. We actually built an urban farm, and this is a pilot program where the person that has the house or the land gets to keep whatever they want to eat, even for their extended family or friends. And the restaurant takes the rest and uses it at our grocery store, donates it, to schools. And the place becomes like an event space where we teach people about, food security, permaculture, and urban farming and the, food security, less trips to the grocery store, saving money and eating way better food. Like a tomato tastes like a tomato. So, I mean, we can only do so much. And I mean, that's how I'm trying to change our little community right here. Yeah.
That's really cool. Imagine that, a tomato tasting like a tomato. Novel thought. Regarding, I don't know much about that. I've never grown anything in my life. I can't even keep a houseplant alive. But back to the employee portion of it. Yeah, I mean, that's been a hot topic for years, right? Is tipping, service charges. I actually helped draft the minimum wage ordinance in Santa Monica when it came to topics like that. So I've done seminars on alternative compensation models over the years. And, it's a tough subject, right? obviously Danny Meyer and some other people who experimented with the non-tipped model. They've either kind of, rethought it or gone back to the old model of doing things. It's hard, right? It's not for everybody. I originally was a huge proponent of things like service charges and surcharges. I've rethought that just because of the last several years of firsthand experience interacting with consumers, restaurateurs, and dealing with just the hassle of it. David's right. There is a complex web of regulations and laws, not only at the state level, but also locally when it comes to how you can communicate things like surcharges, service charges, all that. And then, when you get into it, it's just not worth it for most people. It makes more sense to charge a simple rate for what you need to recoup for that item and just have it be straightforward. Just one thing I wanted to say, because there's been a lot of miscommunication about, David, what you referenced earlier, that one lawsuit regarding service charges and actually what was a healthcare surcharge, that wasn't about the actual charge itself. That was a price fixing lawsuit. The allegation was that they had essentially conspired behind closed doors to set a price or something like that, which personally I think is ridiculous. It was just, anyway, just wanted to clarify that, but certainly a hot topic, definitely a lot of people experimenting with it, but I think you might see more of it now. We've already seen some COVID surcharges out there, which I think is kind of silly, but the reality is that PPE is expensive, right? And when you have to provide all this PPE and you have a reduced capacity in your restaurant, something's got to make it up. And I think that the biggest question and the biggest thing that we can tackle as a society is just taking a realistic look at how much it costs to produce and distribute food, essentially, to grow it, to distribute it, to make it, all that stuff. It's expensive. And I think that we need to kind of have a come to Jesus moment about how much we value that and how much we want a tomato to taste like a tomato.
And I think there's a really important thing, this is how it was explained to me once, that the tipping model came about when Americans first were able to travel abroad and go to Europe, and they were tipping there, and then they came back home and they wanted to be fancy like that, so they sort of started this thing. And then Europe actually went away from the tip model, but then when we had slavery ending, we continued the tip model because it was a way to underpay Black people in labor. And I think if that's true, as I've been told, but if people understood that, especially right now, that could be a powerful conversation to move around.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously it has been a hot topic. I think if anything that 2020 has given us, and it's given us a lot, it's the opportunity to change and the openness of, I think, the public to at least some of the public for that change. So, I think if, the reality of the struggles and the cost of restaurants is pretty much, it's out there for everybody to see. I don't think, people used to think restaurants, and strangely, like a lot of the general public think, restaurants are, swimming in money. But I think this is kind of obviously, that's out there for everybody to see, the struggle, the lack of funding that's come in specifically for restaurants, how many people that restaurants employ, the types of people and different classes that restaurants support. I do want to give like a mini plug to our friends over at Know Us Without You, which is a group that has, of a hospitality folks that do bar hospitality, pretty much have almost gone full time into supporting or raising money to support undocumented families that have been crushed by this pandemic because of loss of restaurant jobs. And these people were, working multiple jobs at a time, up to 3 jobs at a time. Those days might even be over for a while. So they've had great success in kind of getting food in families' hands and homes and stuff like that. So that's been kind of encouraging to see. But I do think, it's time that, we do move away from this tip model, and, we've got to get wages up higher. The only way that that happens is the cost of eating out goes up. And that's just, it is a luxury, and we should see it as that, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, if it's a takeout model, it's less money. Europe, you pay a cover charge to sit and talk for 5 hours. So, I mean, there's just ways that we can make it work. And I think now's the time to look at that change.
I like that idea. Cover charge to sit. I'm gonna dive deep and explore that. Thank you,
It's like
Greg.
in Italy, when you sit and have your coffee, then you tip.
Right.
Well, you pay for the table.
Yeah,
That's how it works. It's like a licensing deal.
Yeah, that's true.
it's a licensing deal.
But I think that kind of ties back into just the value of restaurants in society, right? We are essentially, restaurants are the catch-all unemployment net for the United States of America. We're one of the highest producers of sales tax that funds social services, and we're essentially one of the biggest safety nets for people when it comes to low-wage earners. And I think that everyone from property owners who house restaurants to the public who patronizes them, have to really kind of think about how much we value that industry and the people that we employ.
Well, and part of that is because the burden of healthcare and other benefits is not taken care of by the government compared to other developed nations. So, I mean, some
Here.
It's just so deeply structural. But sort of looking forward, what have you all seen in other countries that have handled the pandemic better than ours, of which there are many examples of that? How do you see people getting back to some semblance of normal, whatever that means now, and some elements that can be adopted here that are realistically not sort of sky stuff?
I just got back from my around the world trip, stopped in Asia and Europe, and I've got tons of data. I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, we studied restaurants in Asia and Europe just to kind of see what they were doing back in April and March. But I don't know. David, Greg, Alexis, anybody traveled? I have no idea.
I hear London's everything's open, everybody's out.
Not
for them.
Not as of Monday.
What?
Back in lockdown on Monday.
Oh, really? Oh, damn.
Yep. France is starting to spike up too. So, I mean, we've had contact with some potential clients in other countries. We had a client that we had talked to that ended up, they actually are embracing California design in restaurants and have opened up these restaurants in Paris, or starting to open up these California style restaurants in Paris.
Avocado toast in Paris?
Yes. Imagine that. It's real, and you can get it. So anyhow, they opened their first restaurant, it opened during the pandemic. It was like they were done with construction, ready to open, training and all that stuff, and DOA essentially. I mean, they've since actually opened. They've put tables and stuff on the street. I assume that they've had some level of indoor dining. I haven't seen any kind of difference in styles of service or styles of, you have to remember a lot of Europe actually has much more confined spaces than we do when it comes to dining. And I think they do a better job of taking control of the street. And they've always done that. So they've been essentially perfectly pivoted to do that, where so much of older towns are walking cities and things like that.
That's true. Yeah, they've been in the street for 500 years.
And you can drink in parks.
That's what we need. We need a nationwide allowance to drink in parks.
I think so.
Without a brown bag.
I got busted for mimosas in Griffith Park. I mean, come on. Yeah. I actually think that's a really interesting model. And we had asked the city about, what sort of food pop-ups could potentially be positioned in the parks. But apparently the city is holding them for potential daycare or like childcare. It's interesting.
Yeah, the use of public space is hard, right? I mean, a lot of workout. I don't just represent restaurants in Santa Monica. It's all small businesses, really, and a lot of workout places are looking for expanded outdoor space, like parks or the Pier. The Pier just launched a great program where they're essentially allowing a certain amount of space for workout facilities to just do a class on the Pier. It's pretty rad. And parks, I think, are a good option for that too. I mean, it's tough balancing the needs of businesses and the public and all
Maybe
that.
Floating restaurants.
Floating restaurants, I like that. That's a good idea. Just put them up like the casinos, like the riverboat casinos. We can just put them out in the river and we're good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe everyone could do a little trash collection at the same time.
That would be nice.
So to wrap things up here, I think I'd like to ask you all, when we can go back to the places that will hopefully be there on the other side of this, what's the first place you all want to go? Ooh. Restaurant. Indoors.
That's a tough one. I'm gonna hold off on that. I'm gonna go last.
Okay.
Greg, where you want to go? I want to know where Greg wants to go.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I have to support my own, so I'd probably go to Bavel.
Okay. Safe choice.
I miss it.
What about you?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask Greg if they were open, if they had that patio open.
The patio's open.
I'm craving it too. I order home state all the time. Being Texan,
great place.
I have to have my queso, and but I miss going to their patio. That would be one, and then the little booths at the bar at the Tam O'Shanter.
Nice.
Yeah.
Unconventional. I like that. David, what about you? Where are you going? You can't say your place.
No, actually, I'd never eat at my place because I'm always there.
Nobody does.
Yeah. Anytime my friends come out of town, we always go to Parks Barbecue. So that's our favorite place. If we ever
Interesting. These are all good choices. I like that. Mine's very boring. My fiance Jennifer is gluten-free, dairy-free, very dietary restrictive, which pretty much makes me like that. So we go to Cafe Gratitude all the time, and that's a great spot, I think, for that kind of food. Also M Cafe, but so we get pickup from there at least twice a week, I think. But I think Cafe Gratitude would be our choice.
Okay.
You, Jessica?
Oh gosh. Actually, mine would be a place. I have like a small list of the confessions of places in LA I've never been to, and that includes Dan Tana's. I've never been to Dan Tana's.
What?
Gotta be indoors.
No.
Totally insane. So I want to go to Dan Tana's finally.
Cool.
All right.
Don't you guys miss going to a bar? I mean, that's the thing that's like, we're going to go to get a Guinness around here.
I just have a bar in my living room now. I'm good.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there's a bar everywhere now.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for this lively, engaging, fascinating conversation. And I wish everyone the best of luck getting through this time.
Thank you all.
To meet you at a restaurant or bar soon.
Yeah.
Yes, we're all gonna high five and hug one day.
Yes.
Okay.